Coordinated, episode 309, January 2026, monthly action items. Greetings, AP coordinators. I'm Karli, school counselor and AP coordinator.
And I'm Abby McCrate, also a school counselor and, of course, AP coordinator. Happy New Year, AP coordinators. Thanks for joining us. It's Monday, January 5th, 2026, and Karli and I are here to talk about what's happening this month for us as AP coordinators.
That's right, it's a new year. And with the new year comes a refresh. New deadlines we have to meet, new tasks we have to complete. And as you know, getting ready for AP exams is no easy feat.
Yes, and we are here today to talk about our first deadline of the new year, the SSD Accommodations Request Deadline. And that deadline is?
Friday, January 16th, 2026. Today, we'll talk about accommodations requests, how to finalize them, how to manage them, and how to be prepared for the unexpected. It's time to talk about putting testing supports in place for our students. It's time to get coordinated.
Hey, Karli, Happy New Year. How is 2026 so far?
Hey, Abby, Happy New Year to you too. So exciting. 2026 is here and we are hitting the ground running. What about your 2026? Off to a good start?
It is. I was just visiting my family in Ohio, a place that is near and dear to my heart. And now I'm back in Los Angeles and getting ready for the new semester to start. Counselor wise, I'm looking forward to continuing to build college lists with my juniors and to celebrating college acceptances with my seniors.
Oh, I love that. A new year and new things to look forward to. Speaking of new, I guess what's not technically new, but what is really important for AP coordinators to think about in January is the upcoming January 16th AP accommodations request deadline.
That's right. So that is our first deadline of 2026. And just to review, January 16th is the date by which our SSD coordinator must ensure that all accommodations requests and complete documentation, if needed, are submitted through SSD Online. And speaking of the SSD coordinator, always leads me to something I enjoy asking my fellow AP coordinators, which is, Karli, are you the SSD coordinator at your school?
Of course I am, Abby. I am the SSD coordinator at my school, but I do get some admin support from an admin intern colleague and friend. Shout out to Miss Skelton.
Oh, nice. Now, I actually am not the SSD coordinator at my school, but I know from talking with you and other AP coordinator friends who are that being the SSD coordinator as the AP coordinator can sometimes make the job easier. I guess it can reduce the number of conversations that you have to have.
It's true.
And by that, I mean, when we get back to school in January, it's always one of my first priorities to review student rosters with my SSD coordinator. I have to know which AP students are College Board SSD approved, which ones are pending approval, and which ones have not been approved.
Yes, absolutely. Reviewing all of that is definitely at the top of my to-do list in January, too.
Totally. Yeah, I find it essential because what typically happens for me during that meeting is that our SSD coordinator confirms that he submitted a request for all the students at our school who receive accommodations with us and are planning to take AP exams. So
Hmm.
it's generally pretty simple, right? He's like, yep, they're good to go. And I can see an AP registration and ordering too that they're all set. But there are sometimes students who produce the documentation for accommodations after the January 16th deadline. And while it's not a super common occurrence at my school, it's usually the case for a few students each year. Maybe it's their first time pursuing or qualifying for accommodations. And of course, they'd like to receive them on their upcoming AP exams. So if it's after the January 16th deadline, Karli, is all hope lost?
That's a great question, Abby. And no, hope is still there. It is not lost. The
Yes.
first thing to know is that the January 16th deadline is the deadline for a guaranteed answer by the time testing begins in May. But requests can still be submitted after that date. Just remember, an answer in time for testing is not guaranteed. If the SSD coordinator receives an accommodations request after the deadline, they should absolutely still submit that request. The College Board's SSD office will always try its hardest to get a decision to the student before testing begins.
That's right. And you know what? As you say that, I have a really good example of this. I recall a situation a few years ago now where my SSD coordinator submitted in March for a student seeking accommodations for her AP exams. And she was approved about a week before testing began. So we were lucky
Wow.
we got that answer in time. Yeah. But when we were talking about conversations that we have with SSD coordinators, if they're not us ourselves, thank
Mm-hmm.
goodness my SSD coordinator remembered to tell me that he was making that request in March. Because since
Mm.
I'm not SSD coordinator, I don't see the decision letters, right, from the College Board's SSD office. And in this case, I would have missed adding that student. So she was approved for extended time. I would have missed adding her to the extended time room on test day if
Mm.
I didn't know that request had been submitted and that she might be getting
Mm-hmm.
approved. So, like we said before, communication is key, especially when you're an AP coordinator, but not your school's SSD coordinator.
Yes, and letting your SSD coordinator know that they can still submit requests after the January 16th deadline is a good thing to know. There's still a possibility of getting an approval.
Definitely. Maybe something else to talk about with your SSD coordinator, just something else for us to remind ourselves is that we can order special format exams and special materials for paper exams in AP registration and ordering for students with expected but not yet approved accommodations. So, if, for example, I know my SSD coordinator has made the request an SSD online for, let's say, like large print exam accommodation for a student who is taking, let's also say, AP French language, I should go ahead and indicate the correct font size for that student under the order special exam materials section, which is on the students page in AP registration and ordering.
Yeah, that's a great tip, Abby. It's better to be safe than sorry. Better to presume approval and have the correct
Mhm.
materials for the student. If the student ends up not being approved, we can update that information at a later point without incurring any fees.
Exactly. No stress about that. I appreciate that we've reviewed some of the common SSD request related information because these challenges, these nuances come up for me about this time every year, and it's helpful to recall them so I can bring them
Mhm.
up with my SSD coordinator. Is there anything else related to SSD that we should chat about, Carly? Anything else you can think of?
Mm, well, maybe. I know something that's come up for me before is a student unfortunately getting injured right before AP testing.
Ah, yes, good thinking. We should talk about what to do for students who have, like you said, some kind of unfortunate injury or accident right before AP exams. This also is making me bring to mind one year we hosted a fundraiser, a junior class fundraiser at a roller skating rink. And we had two students, this was right before AP exams, two students sprained their wrists. I guess they
Mm.
weren't used to being on roller skates. Kids maybe don't roller skate now as often as they used to. Landed on their hands to catch themselves. And of course, the wrists they injured were their writing hands. And you can imagine their concern about not being able to write. It's a few years ago. So at that time, a lot
Mhm.
more writing, not being
Mhm.
able to write for their AP exams.
Yeah, that would definitely be a stressful situation for those kids. But now we can tell them not to worry. The SSD coordinator can request assistance for students with temporary physical or medical conditions such as sprained wrists or a broken arm.
That's right. And I remember hearing last year that the process for SSD coordinators to make those requests was streamlined so that requesting temporary supports would just be even easier. So
Hmm.
essentially, SSD coordinators request temporary supports and SSD online in the same way that other accommodations and supports are requested, right?
Hmm.
So from the SSD dashboard, coordinators select New Request and then simply select Request Temporary Impairment Support. They'll be prompted to upload documentation through SSD Online, and then the student appears on the SSD Online dashboard.
Sounds easy. SSD coordinators should try to submit requests for temporary accommodations as soon as possible, and ideally 2 weeks before the exam date. When that's possible, of course. I've had things come up in the past at the relative last minute. Fortunately, our colleagues in SSD are so helpful in these cases.
Absolutely. Carly, these reminders and tips we're giving each other make me feel like now is the perfect time to point out that I have put one of my most used resources in the show notes. And that is, drumroll please, the AP Accommodations Guide. Like I said, link in the show notes. It was released in December, so relatively recently, and it is the source for information related to AP exam accommodations.
Yes, great addition, Abby. As the SSD coordinator for my school, I find myself coming back to the AP accommodations guide often, specifically in my planning phases when I am trying to determine who can test in which rooms. I really appreciate the tables that you can find on pages 34 to 38. It really helps me determine the number of rooms I will need for my students testing with accommodations.
Definitely. I'm so glad you pointed out that resource because I find myself on those pages often. Like I had the pages memorized from last year. So good to know they're 34 to 38 this year. One thing I like that I'm seeing in this year's guide that I can't remember if we had last year, I'm guessing we did, and I just don't remember it. But there's like a section early on that shows you how different accommodations work with different modes of testing. So I often find that, we're managing hybrid digital, fully digital, and paper testing, for
Hmm.
offering exams in all three of those categories, plus a variety of accommodations. And there's this table at the very front of the guide that's really helpful with knowing how certain accommodations function across different modes of testing. So, for example, I have some students that are supposed to have, it says like printed copy of verbal instructions.
Hmm.
Now, this table lets us know that for fully digital and hybrid digital exams, they can just go to the help button in their exam and they'll see those instructions. So there's no need to print something. But for a pencil and paper exam, you would need to print the proctor instructions to give to the student. So instead of having to like hold all that in my mind, it's just right here in a table I can reference.
It's really helpful. The guide is a great resource, and the timing of its release is perfect. We can review and share it with our SSD coordinators or look it over ourselves if you are the SSD coordinator like me before the January 16th accommodations request deadline. And again, we linked to the guide in the show notes for this episode.
Yeah, I love that these resource drops come at just the right time.
That's right, Abby. Timing is so important to our work as AP coordinators, and it's definitely time right now. Time to be ready for the new semester, time to be prepared for requesting accommodations, and time to be coordinated. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Karli and I will be back with you in February to share what we're working on for the month. We're going to be adjusting the rhythm of our episodes for the remainder of the school year. Second semester is a busy time of year, and we want to respect everyone's time as well as focus and streamline our episodes. So stick with us, please. We'll talk with you soon.
That's right. Because as we know, Abby, no one does it better. And no one appreciates more time to do great work that supports our students. No one other than us AP coordinators, of course. Because, we are truly good as gold.
And maybe I just don't know. I'll say it over and over. let's go.
Hey, AP coordinators, are you looking for quick answers to those common tasks we do in AP registration and ordering?
Especially some that we only do once a year, which, side note, Carly, for me, that is changing AP art and design portfolio types. I always need reminders about how to do that.
Absolutely, me too. Or would you like to teach your students how to troubleshoot their account login challenges before they come to you?
Mhm. If you answered yes to these questions, have we got the place for you?
The AP Coordinator Experience YouTube channel houses 4 different playlists as well as the Coordinated Podcast.
That's right, Carly, and it's an excellent resource. The playlist that might help us the most is the AP registration and ordering playlist. This features over 10 short videos on how to do everything in AP registration and ordering, from how to create a class section to, my personal favorite, how to switch AP Art and Design exams to how to switch students to late testing.
Support for AP students includes a video to help students troubleshoot any challenges they have when logging in to their College Board accounts. This is a favorite and a great way to ensure that our students are ready for exams in May.
We also have playlists for coordinators, the back to school workshops, and, cue the excitement, a new playlist coming in January that will really help us out with another big topic. Stay tuned.
Visit the AP Coordinator Experience YouTube channel for all these videos and more.